Click.
Hi, Sarah. I like your sweater.
And we're live. It
Wait, are you guys
is
getting a terrible echo now?
no. Do you have more than one Crowdcast window open?
You do this sometimes.
That would account for a terrible echo.
Hold on. Yes, I do.
Yeah, close one of them. It is Tuesday, December 7th. That's Pearl Harbor Day to you, 2021, 5:02 p.m. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, shit, why did I vote for Fluffy Poodle Shirt in the poll here about what Ben was wearing when I knew from his Twitter feed today that Fluffy Poodle Shirt had only shipped today, which is admittedly very exciting.
Have they sent you a message about it, though? Or is it just a notification of shipment absent a message?
It is a normal old clothing monster. Your order has shipped. And so it's super exciting. Fluffy Poodle Shirt is on the way. But as you can see, I am not wearing Fluffy Poodle Shirt. And so in order to answer these questions correctly that are in the poll, and I want to flag them for you for those who are watching but haven't looked at the poll. The first question is, what do you think Ben is wearing on the show today? And the answer, Fluffy Poodle Shirt dominated the answers. A shoebill shirt came in second. A suit got only 3 votes. Somebody just added a 4th vote. Once you can see what I'm wearing, it doesn't count. 3 votes. Second question is, guess where Ben and Sarah were before today's show?
I guessed wrong on this one.
2 votes here account for over almost 90% of the vote. One is attending a secret meeting of the Revolutionary Council, whatever the hell that means.
Yeah,
the other is eating pho. But the answer, the true answer, which got only 2 votes, is interviewing Suzanne and Lucienne, which we were in fact doing. We had a great conversation with the actors who played Suzanne and Lucienne on A French Village. And this brings us to guess where Ben and Sarah will be after today's show. My house overwhelmingly won. Again, inexplicable number of votes for a secret meeting of the Revolutionary Council, if only such thing existed. Interestingly, my house beat Sarah's house by a lot. Villeneuve got 1 vote. The French ambassador's house, which is the correct answer.
They do know that Villeneuve is like a fictional town, right?
Well, one person, I suspect it was Ducks with Pants, voted for Villeneuve. The French ambassador's residence, which is why I am wearing a suit. So we are not allowed to have fun anymore. But actually today we kind of are allowed to have fun because interviewing Suzanne and Lucienne and the showrunner, producer of French Village podcast French Village was super fun.
I have so many questions.
A reception to honor them this evening is going to be fun as well. So, Sarah Longwell, welcome back to the show. How did you like our interviews with the French villagers?
Well, I don't know. Ben was like really like cool through the whole thing.
Were you fangirling?
Oh, I was like hardcore fangirling, and let me tell you why.
Tell me everything.
So first of all, like Lucienne, the woman who plays Lucienne Marie.
It's fucking hot.
Yes, that's not where I was going, but it's
also
true statement.
But nothing like the character.
Like, which is of course normal. They're actors. It's not like that's how they. But like, imagine seeing Lucienne being like big hoop earrings, super pretty, funny, modern. She was very sarcastic. She like in the beginning, she was like. They were wearing masks and Ben and I weren't, which actually maybe was terrible, but we were, and she was like,
we were recording a podcast.
We were getting ready to podcast.
They took off their masks.
They did. But she was like, do you have COVID? And like, no. And she's like, okay. I'm not even doing it justice, but it was,
she was very funny. and couldn't have been less like Lucienne, which I don't know like why that surprises anybody, but it surprised me.
There's like a solid no. I mean we've never discussed this, but there's like in acting, like there are like people who are typecast for a reason. Like I was just like right, like they like that there is like something about the nature of their personality lends them to being typecast or something else, and like they really just are like kind of
well you want to hear how not typecast Marie Kremer was in should we give away the breaking get a little bit of news here. She revealed in this that two things. One is that the director and had to keep insisting that she look at the floor more, because Lucienne is the sort of person who stares at the floor and doesn't look up.
That's true. I noticed that a lot about like she does do that. She doesn't do a lot of eye contact.
Yeah, and she found this upsetting and sort of degrading, but agrees that it is the appropriate posture for Lucienne. And the second thing was she finally got so sick of the submissive posture of Lucienne that she sent the director and writer an email that's like, I can't do this anymore. This character's got to do something. And shortly thereafter is when Lucienne has her lesbian affair, which I thought was just the most surprising.
There's a lesbian affair in a French village?
It's a kiss.
Oh, yeah.
It's
See,
not...
Kate, you should have stuck with it.
What
but
the fuck?
but what's great is that Marie, the woman who plays Lucienne, was like, so she told him like, I can't keep doing all this like submissive stuff. And then like, so they give her like a lesbian season, and she's like, I feel like you went too far. Like, I feel like this is too big a jump.
I just wanted a rabbit or something. Like, that was a pun.
But wait, whatever. Can we just back up for 1 second? So like, let me just tell you how this all came to be, because it's like,
yes,
one day,
I would like to know how it came to be.
So Ben and I get an email.
What's
from
the person?
No, Ben and I get an email from the guy who like coordinates things with the French embassy and the American, what's it called, Ben?
So it's an organization called, I believe it's called American Media Abroad. But let me check that, because if we're going to be talking about them,
but they were basically like, the writers and some of the actors are coming into town. They're getting an award for the show, and they want to know if you want to talk to them, and like, would you like to come to the French embassy and meet them? And I was like, are you kidding? This is like the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And it's funny, in the interview, Ben is being cool. Ben's asking like historical questions, like how did the guy get the idea for the show, and was it about politics at the time? And I was like, I want to talk about why Hortense went mad, like why she went crazy. I would like to know why did Lucienne have a lesbian like season? Like what? I didn't even get to all my questions about like why did they do the things in the woods, but it was wild to get to have. And let me just tell you about one of the funniest elements of this is
Sarah's gonna join. She's gonna become a correspondent for what's it called? That television channel that does Hollywood stuff.
TMZ?
Yeah.
It's literally a letter. TMZ? E? Yeah.
E, yeah. I was thinking of E.
But what was so funny is they were like, towards the end, they were like, so why is this popular in America? Like, they were like, this show's been over for 5 years. Like, why do you have a podcast about it? Why are you suddenly? And of course, my questions for them were things like, do you think we're like weird stalkers? Or do you think it's like, are you flattered that there's a podcast about you? Like, do you think it's weird that these Americans have this whole podcast devoted to your show?
I also just want to impress upon the audience here that the
did you tell them that it wasn't actually popular, that it was just you guys?
No, it's not.
Popular. It's not, Kate.
So I I want to impress upon you all the role that the In Lieu of Fun community played in this. Eve Gaumont flew in from Quebec to be our translator in this conversation, and you will hear her voice prominently in the podcast, which will go up when Great American Priya Gada prepares it. So yes, it will be up on the French Village podcast feed.
Yes, we're gonna release the whole thing, but first it's gonna require some editing because there was a lot of they spoke English, but then when they really had something to say, they would go into French because they couldn't express it in English. So then Ev would have to kind of jump in and translate, and so it was a little bit choppy, and we'll have to do some editing. But it was.
I love all of this. All of this.
It was super good fun.
Yeah. Can I ask what did they give any kind of elucidation on what the reception of it has been in Europe to their depiction of the war, and to because I know that you and at various points I got maybe obsessed with a small bunny, but there's lots of little plot points, but I am
pretty
kind of
large
very curious.
Bunny, actually.
I mean, it was large hair.
Yeah. Captain Carrot is not a small rabbit.
But I really do want to know, is the perception that they have done a service in kind of a nuanced telling of, because I loved Ben's history and stuff, and I assumed that, I just kind of am curious, from a European perspective, whether it's appreciated as much as it is here, because I feel like it explains a lot of history and in the water kind of culture that probably exists in Europe that doesn't exist here.
Can I just tell you, the most interesting thing that we kind of didn't know what to do with, here's some behind the scenes. I was writing notes to Ben, and is that when Ben, opens with a question about, what was on your mind politically? Were you seeing the rise of, and this isn't exactly what you said, but the rise of fascism in France, and was that the reason why you wanted to tackle this subject? And this guy was literally no. I was just looking for what would be a cool story to tell. And I was really into cinema. And so I was trying to figure out how to make a show that was cinematic. And I just wanted it to be popular and interesting. And he was also kind of loosey-goosey in his own, he told a bunch of funny stories about the historian they had and how they were overruling the historian to be no, I know this wouldn't happen then, but this is a more interesting thing, story to tell.
Well, the historian was fine.
Yeah.
No, they. Huh. But I also.
This is a really interesting point in the kind of death of the author idea. Sorry, go ahead, Ben.
No, I think this show was wildly popular in France. It was sort of the number one show in France, and one of the things that really kind of blew me away about this conversation is the woman who plays Lucienne, Marie Kremer.
We give her a name. What's the actress?
Her name is Marie Kremer.
Okay.
And she told us, which I guess I would have, this show was made over 10 years, which since we watched it, I watched it over less than a year. I never really thought about that they started making this in 2008 and they finished it in 2017. And this woman was 25 when she started playing Lucienne and 35 when she finished playing Lucienne.
It's such an interesting date range.
Yeah, exactly.
And personal development for a woman.
And it's a we think of it as this condensed period of time, because that's how we watched it over COVID, but it's actually The Sopranos. It ran for a long time in France, and I do think some of the history that we think of as exquisitely detailed is just sufficiently known there that it may be a little bit less impressive that they got so much right as it impresses me. But
right. But I think that this is an interesting point. I think that you grow up in the United States, and if you go to public school and you take history, you learn about the Mason-Dixon line, and you understand the Civil War, and you understand significant moments in US history that are like then kind of just like there is a passiveness in which you take on that history and a passiveness in which you like I guess I was you're not actively interrogating it because you're 8 or 10 or like 14, right? You're just like, oh yeah, like we freed the slaves and that was great and these bad things happened and now there's still some racism and bad stuff in the South and there's like, but like there are things that when you go down to the South or you would like understand in a different light when you're 25, knowing, having like imbibed that history than you would if you were French and went to the South. It's like to Atlanta, right? Or to like Savannah. Like that's, I mean, like my point being that like, that would strike me as the same thing. If that is true of the United States and my understanding of being a US citizen, like, and the civics around that, like that would have to be true of the history and the length of history of like the French and their role in the war and all of the complications. But I don't know, how do they teach World War II in France?
I don't know the answer to that. I you know, and probably my French is not good enough to try to figure it out.
But here's what he did say. So like we asked when Ben was asking the showrunner the question of the politics, one of the things that he said was like his grandmother always talked about the occupation. So like, you know, this guy's probably, he's older than us, or maybe he's like 50 now. I don't know. But he is, he was talking about how like when he was a kid, everybody who was like his grandparents' age, the occupation was the thing that had shaped them and formed them. And so they did grow up with the connection to, you know, the way people talked about it and the devastation that it wrought, the psychological, you know, just how much damage it did. But also, I mean, what I liked about what he said was that I think what we came away with from the show is ultimately what he was trying to get at, which is that people, when these extreme circumstances come up, that, you know, there's some universality to the way that people respond to things, right? That like it can echo through history because people are still people. And even though you learn lessons, but he wasn't necessarily setting out to make a political point. He wanted to tell a story first and foremost. And then he also wanted to show how the gray areas exist in people, which I think, of course, is the show and does that quite effectively. The other thing was like, you know, Ben and I argued a lot on the podcast about Lucienne and like what the point was. And I do think that when she described her character, it was in this way of like, imagine you're just a sort of Catholic person, you know, you've grown up Catholic and all of a sudden like all this stuff's happening around you. Like, you know, because talking about like all of her bad choices. And she was saying how like Lucienne was a maddening person to play and like made her furious on one hand, but on the other hand, she felt the need to defend her sometimes because like she didn't ask to be put in the middle of an occupation. She's just like a random person who was trying to live life and like, but for this occupation might have, you know, not been so terrible.
But like this was to me the kind of like really interesting part of the show, even though I didn't watch it as much as you guys did because I couldn't handle it. Like that is to me, like I grew up, and I know we've talked about this, but I grew up in Western New York, and it was like I grew up like playing in a house that was literally on the Underground Railroad, like had hidden rooms and like things like that. It was not my house, but like my friend's house. And like that this was like being a hero, like in this time was seen as somewhat like that was most of the story that was told. Or like the people who behave. What's so interesting about the French Village is that they tell the story of like not only the heroes, but the sometimes heroes and the sometimes villains, and it's the gray. I think that they tell. Like, it's not hard to imagine from your history book the heroes or the villains. It is like the people like Lucien who like are sometimes absolutely evil and sometimes really good, right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that was sort of the point. They wanted to tell a story about this thing that happened that was a compelling story, but that they didn't really want to have. They wanted to tell a story of regular people and how they reacted, and wanted to show the gray, which I think they successfully did. There was a lot of great tidbits in there, you know. One of the things, so Suzanne, who is, I think, especially for Ben. So, right, Ben, you weren't.
Which one is Suzanne again?
She was the socialist, and she's very.
Oh yes.
She's also like, very lovely.
The cough. The cough.
No.
She's the one who becomes the lover of the Marcel Larcher, the communist younger brother of the.
I never got far enough in the story to meet her. Okay, then I don't know. Sorry.
But she's something of a she's like one of the closer you get to a hero. And Ben really always loved her. And I got to tell you, Ben, you were like Ben was like totally cool during this whole thing, and I was like,
you know, Sarah, I do interviews like multiple times a week. I mean, it is something that like I do a lot of.
Sarah doesn't interview people.
No, I talk to people, and so I just wanted to talk to them. I didn't. I just wanted to like chat and hear about their lives.
You were asking your questions, and I was asking my questions. I was definitely fanboying. I mean, that was Suzanne. You know, she's. But the thing is, it's not actually Suzanne. It's Constance Dolay who plays Suzanne, who's a very, very interesting person, by the way.
Once she got rolling in English, I thought she was saying. I'm excited actually for people to hear the podcast because I thought she was saying really interesting, thoughtful things about the way that people, not about making political judgments, but the way that people take the stuff, take it, and like they were pretty interested in the way that we had found the show so attractive, right? And I think so she was very interested, and we were having a pretty interesting discussion about like why, because they don't really know us or who we are. They listened to the very first episode of the podcast and they listened to the last episode of the podcast coming into it, I think, to get a sense of it. But I think that they didn't quite realize until we explained to them how the show had such resonance for Americans in the Trump era who were thinking about how this kind of thing happens with people. How do people fall in line? How do they become complicit in something, all the time acknowledging that it's not the same, but that the decisions people make, actually, there's a lot of echoes in there, a lot of things you can identify. And I think upon hearing that, they had an interesting reaction to us, and that we saw that value in the show. It was pretty cool.
Can I ask a question? So like, in like freshman English, right? Like you are in like college, you kind of learn about the death of the author. I don't know if you guys remember this, but
here's the death of the author.
Right, Ben. Okay, great. Good impersonation. Anyways, the idea being that like you can never get into the mind of the author and truly understand, you know, because eventually the author dies and there's no author there to ask questions to, and the questions will always be incomplete. And also, who the fuck cares, because they've just put out a thing into the world, and so it is open to interpretation, and so like people can take from it what they will. And I actually want to bring this up because when I was in college, I took a class that kind of changed my life, which was called Middlemarch and the Sopranos, which was about like, we read George Eliot's Middlemarch, which was at first published in serial. Like, I don't know if you remember this, but it's like now a very thick book, but it's like, it was published in serial, like kind of like segments. And it was very salacious and had the same type of like crazy character development and drama in theory that like the Sopranos had. And it was like judged next to the Sopranos. So like we would watch episodes of the Sopranos, and then we would also like read like Middlemarch. Might have done more watching of the Sopranos than I did reading of Middlemarch, but regardless, the death of the author exists in both. Like, we weren't allowed to look at the director's cuts with David Chase talking about shit, right? Like, there wasn't any of that. And so I'm really interested because it's so fascinating to me that, like, but also not at all surprising that the author is, like, disappointing or has no intention in creating some of these things.
So first of all, one of the striking things about it, and the chief writer on Un Village Français is a man named Frédéric Crevin, who was supposed to be here but couldn't because he got COVID, unfortunately, and so he's okay, but he's in France. The reverence with which all three of them talked about him actually made me pleased that Sarah and I had spent so much time on the show talking about the screenwriting, because the writing of this is a huge part of their Marie at one point said that, without the writer we are nobody, and like they talked about him just all the time, and I thought that was just a really interesting account of, not in the sense that you mean, but how dead the author isn't, right? That
well, just the fact that she wrote to the author and she wanted to change her it's an interesting tidbit. I don't know.
There is a dialogue that this reflects that is quite pervasive, I think, between the actors and the writers. And, she talks about Crevin with this amazing sense of him as a collaborator in this project. And, I always think of a screenplay as something that kind of shows up and you work with. But I was really impressed at how live the sense of the writer was in this conversation.
Yeah. It was.
So, Sarah, how's Democracy doing?
Yeah. I was going to say, we should talk about something other than French Village. People will think that, like, French Village is what I do. It's quick side hobby. This was just such a nice little culmination of everything to have them notice that the podcast existed, call up and want to hang out.
It was pretty awesome.
Just a little dream come true. Just wild. And it also, can I just say, I don't know.
Why you put things out into the world like this.
That's what I was just gonna say. That's what I was just gonna say. Like, there is something crazy about putting things out in the world, because then stuff comes back to you. It's just, I don't know. It's just a cool experience. But anyway, Democracy. Yeah. So,
you feeling good about it? The over under is.
It's not great.
I don't really know that I want your quick hits on Democracy right now. I'm just feeling like tired about it.
All right, no Democracy today. We're taking a break from Democracy.
Instead of, we can talk about politics. Because I have a little bit of a Democracy. I'm concerned about both. But I do think there's a bunch of interesting things happening on the political front. So, like, I don't know if you guys have recognized this, but it's going to be Christmas, and then it's going to be New Year's, right? Very soon. And then it's 2022. And 2022 is gonna be here. And the second that we turn the corner after the holidays, I think our first primary is in March. And so there's
for money or something. I feel like everyone's hitting me up for money now. I'm like, Wikipedia, like every page I go to, it's like some little like interstitial trying to be like, it's the end of the year, donate. I'm like,
I'm not asking anybody for money. I'm only bringing this up as just a, it feels like we just had an election. It was all so exhausting. It was extended by Trump not conceding, by there being an insurrection, by there being a bunch of things that just made the process go on. And then we've been in this, Biden basically had 9 months, but like, we're going to turn the corner on 2022, and it's going to become about these primaries, and it's going to be, I think, pretty wild. Can I just give you a quick 2022 rundown of what we're about to see? So I don't know if I don't know if we've talked since the the elections in Virginia and New Jersey. But obviously, huge swings against the Democrats. Some of that historical, some of it COVID, some of it the candidates and other things. But there's a lot of talk about Glenn Youngkin being like a kind of a specific kind of candidate. And the thing that I want to stress, that I'm trying to explain to people going into 2022, there are not other Glenn Youngkins on these tickets. You are about to see a host of crazy Trumpers, Herschel Walker in Georgia, Eric Greitens, the guy who tied a woman up in his basement, photographed her, and blackmailed her.
Greitens is a prince of a guy.
He's already resigned once in disgrace, and he is
leading. How is it possible that like people come back from these things? I just don't understand. I can't possibly be alone in that.
Kate, it's just because you have
like literally John Edwards is living down like a Dave Matthews concert and a haircut, and like.
It's just, you got to get over your own bias. You have anti-tying up women in your basement bias. And
it's not that, is my bias. It's the extorting her with it that I find it to be the bias.
Oh, you're okay with the tying up part?
Well, like, if it was consensual, like, who the hell
It was not consensual.
Not consensual.
Exactly.
This is bad. This guy's, this is
why.
He's a bad guy.
And this is what's wild. If you think about as recently as 2010, the Democrats got the crap kicked out of them in Obama's first term, and in the House, but they kind of held on to the Senate. And they kind of held on to the Senate because they had legitimate rape guy. They had Christine O'Donnell, I am not a witch woman. They had a bunch of really insane Senate candidates. And so the Democrats didn't lose as badly in the Senate. And I do think that 2022 is potentially shaping up in a similar way where you're probably going to get routed in the House, but the Senate candidates matter. They're statewide races. And so you've got Eric Greitens, and now whoever wins the Republican primary in Missouri is almost guaranteed to be the senator in Missouri because it's Missouri. Same with Alabama. Alabama, you've got Mo Brooks running. Mo Brooks, who was Donald Trump's Warm Up Act on the January 6th, who said today is the day American patriots start kicking ass right before they stormed the Capitol. He believes the election was stolen as a big stop the steal guy. Josh Mandel in Ohio.
Wait, yeah. Sarah, you don't think the Democrats could put anywhere in Missouri that there is a Democrat who could Claire McCaskill, Eric Greitens?
I'm sure that there is. And frankly, this is in my sort of fantasy politics, you would see some either former Republicans or people people kind of center right challenging them as either independents or as Democrats, because Eric Greitens is totally beatable in that state. Josh Mandel, Tim Ryan is actually a good candidate in Ohio. Look, I would tell you normally, absolutely no Republican is going to get beat in Ohio, because Ohio is really red now. It's like a Trump, it's like an R plus 9-10 state. Trump won by 8 and change. But people hate Josh Mandel. And Tim Ryan's actually a pretty good candidate. In Pennsylvania, you've got this wild race where Dr. Oz, Sean Parnell, also a wife abuser, because the case was going to be unsealed. He dropped out. He was Trump endorsed. Now you've got Dr. Oz entering the race. There might be a normie that gets in here. But there's just between Herschel Walker and Eric Greitens and Josh Mandel, Dr. Oz, there is about to be a circus, a Trumpy circus on the Republican side. Youngkin won by kind of, he showed some Trumpy leg with the early on, but he didn't have to run in a primary. And so he
Trumpy
talked about
leg
election.
is a term I never want to hear again.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, one of my terms of art, as a result, Kate texts me every time somebody uses the phrase tongue bath. Yes. Because I said it one time.
I actually hate you for this. I'm every time I hear it, I'm like, why? And now, every time Nina licks her bed incessantly, I'm like, oh my God, Sarah Longwell, get out of my brain. Sorry.
All right. Chris Argyris has a relevant question here.
Trumpy leg.
Okay. So I guess this might be more of a Ben, but I'm curious what Sarah would say about if nothing that Trump does matters to Trump voters. So is there anything to this, quote, alternative Mueller report that Andrew Weissman has called, quote, an internal report memorializing everything we found? especially in light of the former guy now confessing to obstruction of justice on Fox, where he said, "I don't think I could have survived if I didn't fire Comey."
Sorry, I had your question confused with Daniel's, I think. So, look, I think, but look, so let me, this is a little off topic, so let me deal with it briefly. Look, is it going to change anything? Of course not. Trump didn't really say anything in there that he didn't already say 100 times. The unredacted Mueller report has some interesting detail of precisely the type we expected it to have. It has but look, anybody who's like, well, I was really on the fence about the president's conduct based on the real Mueller report, is not going to be pushed over the edge by these marginal things. I think we just have to accept that a very large percentage of people don't care. That's not to say that we shouldn't talk about it, and we shouldn't, but I don't think we should kid ourselves that, like, oh, now that we have the unredacted thing, finally people can be like, oh yeah, that whole thing, like, it turns out, Donald Trump Jr. really was, like, pushing the edge of the law there. I mean, I just don't think it's going to happen.
So I want to hear Sarah's thoughts on this, but I actually also kind of want to ask a question, which is like related to this, which is that for a very long time, for all of the Russia Mueller report kind of stuff, for all of this, like, I have been in the belief system, knowing the people that I know that vote for Trump, and like knowing how that, like, exactly like this type of thing, like, it does not matter what happens or what he does. Like, as he says, he could go out and he could shoot a person, like, in broad daylight, and it wouldn't matter. And this is like, I really do believe that. Like, I do believe that the people that have lionized him and vote for him and are his loyals, like, do so out of like a sense that is like divorced from rationality and reason and any type of proof or evidence that you could ever give them, ever, because it just like doesn't, it's, as I said, just like not a part of the thing. What's interesting to me is like the extent to which this filters down to lesser characters that get some Trumpian leg, as Sarah has now poisoned my brain with. But like, no, I'm serious. Like, when are you like allowed to tie up a woman in your basement or get an $800 haircut or like go
those
to a
two things
Klan rally
aren't of
without
comparable gravity.
No, but like, I'm serious. Like, what? Like Trump can do whatever he wants, but what about his minions? Like to what extent are they given the same grace?
My 2 cents here, if I can.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I'm going to change my question, which was about Roe, to I was listening, Sarah, to you and JVL on the December 3rd Secret Pod and loving it. But I am just ripping my hair out to hear this equivocation, which is trying to make actions that are taken by Ron DeSantis, trying to find his 200 civilians to be part of his, civilian court. This is authoritarianism happening right now. I've got On Tyranny sitting over my shoulder here. I've got the graphic edition of On Tyranny, which is lovely if you haven't seen it, because it has the pictures that tie into Snyder's words. And the fact of the matter is, like you were saying, this is 2022 is on us, and we have got to get over this idea that this is about something other than what it is, which is that the Republican Party is turning into an
that
So yeah,
bad thing.
Sarah, talk about this DeSantis core of armed gubernatorial agents. What? How
Well, Ben,
serious is it?
Ben, I saw you tweet it. So JVL read the first I'd heard of it was like I was reacting to it on the podcast. And so JVL was like reading it to me and I was like, well, that sounds weird. But then I saw a bunch of people, including you, I thought, say this is not weird at all. Like tons of states have this. This is not strange. This is not one of the things to be freaking out about. And so you tell me.
So I don't know, honestly. I learned
What is
about
this?
it. I
I'm sorry.
learned about it on the podcast, listening to you guys, and I haven't gone back and studied it myself. Sorry, this is Kate. Is it a proposal or a piece of legislation that has passed in Florida? In which
So my understanding is it's a proposal by Ron DeSantis that he wants to put together a civilian group that's basically like, I guess they'd be armed, but you could call them in lieu of the police if you needed extra hands. And it sounds a little bit like, it's really gross when you sort of first hear about it, because he was like, oh, I think that the case that they made was they would help with, hurricanes and trying to help people. But the concern is it sounded like militarizing civilians and like a kind of a private army and things like that. But then I just saw a bunch of smart people that I respect say, like, this is not a thing to freak out about. Like Texas has this, New York has this, lots of states have these civilians.
Yeah, I would also say that, like, I didn't look at it, but I know that, like, such things exist all the time. I mean, they're not actually so different from any type of organized, like,
so my question is,
they're like a more organized version of Neighborhood Watch. It would
but it reports to the governor.
Yeah, but like it would depend. Yeah, well, it would. That's what I was just going to say. It would depend on who it reports to and what like they're imagined in terms of like their weaponization and things like that. Like, but
so my question is, how is it different from the state police in most states, right? Which also can be called out by the governor. They're also armed.
Yeah, but they're also trained very specifically, and I think there's like a higher level of accountability.
Yeah, there's like a whole there's a whole process in which people are trained or like selected and trained as state police and qualify as state police. This is more ad hoc, kind of like almost like a National Guard. Like it's like right? Like, I mean, like, unless I'm like misunderstanding this, like this sounds like a National Guard / like kind of like a ad hoc kind of like civilian population, Ben.
This is one of those things I don't know enough about to really comment on. And so I'd rather answer her broader question, which is about, is the Republican Party becoming authoritarian? And you know what's funny? It's not funny. What's interesting is that there's gradations to what's happening in the Republican Party, because there are silly people, right? Just performance artists. Like, is Marjorie Taylor Greene an authoritarian, or is Marjorie Taylor Greene like a lunatic attention seeker? And Donald Trump is always
Porque no los dos.
Yeah, well, Charlie talks about this sometimes. There's like a clown.
Well said, Ben.
A clown
in the language of the enemy. Sorry.
Well, like is Trump has authoritarian tendencies in the sense that he wants to be like, why can't I just wave a wand and do whatever I want? I'm the president of the United States. But he also has like no real agenda, right? He didn't have he didn't aspire to be an authoritarian because he had a thing that he wanted to do at his core, like some political set of beliefs other than like a random smattering of, America first things. But there's the authority. Sometimes I don't know how to respond to the authoritarianism stuff, because the stuff that's scary to me is the fact that Republicans have what I've always felt like is a kind of healthy skepticism of institutions. I have healthy skepticisms of institutions. I think it's part of the sort of the makeup that brings people to conservatism, that has now turned into kind of a toxic, grievance-based, distrust of everything, conspiratorial mindset. And as a result, they just like they distrust everything and they reach for sort of strong men. But they're like clownish strong men. And this is where, but there's, you can be like Ross Douthat, who's always like, Trump's too much of a clown to be worried about, which is wrong. You should be worried about it. You should be worried that Steve Bannon is talking about having an army of people who become poll watchers and that are meant, and it's just like, and Bannon would say, well, they're just citizens participating, except that they're all hopped up on grievance and rage, and it's not like they're there to be like, I'm here because I would like to exercise my neutral civic duty of being somebody who works at the polls. It's like, no, we are an army of people who think you guys stole an election, and we're here to like enforce something in some way. And so I just, my only point is that like there's layers to this, and it's sometimes it's too much to just say they're an authoritarian party, because in a lot of ways they're a clownish party, which isn't to say they're not dangerous. Like, this is what Charlie says, like, a clown with a flamethrower still has a flamethrower. And so like you've got to sort of think about it like that. But it's not like undoing authoritarianism in some of these other countries, because ours are made up of people who are like game show hosts.
But yeah, but can I also just, okay, I love this point, and can I just foot stump this one other element of it, which is that, to your point, a lot of people very typically in movements that have popular take-up do not have theoretical or pragmatic underpinnings to support the intuition that they are able to, like, I don't know, perform or to like hang their political movement on, that like gives them their power, so that they don't know what to do once they have that power. There's no kind of thesis, so to speak. There's a feeling that they're able to grapple with, but then that's it. Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right, Terry, we don't want to Alice you. The floor is yours.
So my question, I'm in Ohio, and our state legislature is considering a divisive content bill, which is also like the anti-CRT bill. And it's not just Ohio. Those are, I think it's probably an ALEC bill. It shows up in a lot of places. And I could go through who's on which side and what I've seen. And we all know the arguments about free speech and all that kind of stuff. My question is, how do you make an appeal to a state legislator that they shouldn't support such legislation?
Well, it depends on the legislator and what the opportunities are for convincing them. Like, I mean, that I don't know how to answer that in a broad terms, because a big part of what's happening with legislators is that, like, they're people who, like, what's that phrase about oh no, whatever. They're like leading from behind, right? The voters, what's happening is that the voters just have a general skepticism of elections. And so the Republicans are saying, okay, well, which of course Trump has given them. There's a reason that they have it. Everybody forgets this part, but like, so now there's this skepticism. And so they're saying, well, we're going to put in these new, and it's different in all of these states. What they're doing in Wisconsin, right, where they're making them partisan. They're getting rid of the nonpartisan election boards. Like, that stuff is really scary, because they're basically politicizing everything that used to be sort of a neutral civic institution. But like, how do you convince them? I mean, the way you convince them is that it's unpopular to the people who elect them and that they don't want them to do it. The problem is that the people in their party want them to do whatever. They don't really know the mechanisms. They're just demanding that you secure the elections. And so that gives people who want to be able to use it to secure their own power a lot of the cover that they need to make moves, to politicize things, and to put themselves in sort of political power. I mean, that's it. That's what's happening. And I don't know you're not going to convince them not to do it unless they are the kind of person who have a conscience who would say, well, this is wrong and bad for democracy. The way that you convince them is nobody's going to tolerate this. Either your peers aren't going to tolerate it or your voters aren't going to tolerate it. Problem is, right now, the voters and their peers tolerate it.
Yeah, I would just say, as a general matter, the problem is not persuading legislatures. Once an idea like CRT, an anti-CRT law has hit a legislature, you're probably too late on the persuasion game. This is a uh, 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 and the reason is those legislators are beholden to constituencies that are excited about this. And so you've already lost an argument at a public level that somebody thinks it's in their political advantage, or a majority of the legislature thinks that it's in their political advantage to advance something like this. And I think honestly this is a human persuasion issue, more than a legislative persuasion issue, at least in the first instance. We are going to end a little early today because Sarah and I have to get to the French embassy. But Eric Berg, you get the final question.
Yeah. Has there been any good focus group information coming out on what Americans think of the court and Roe that would give us any political hints on the fallout from that?
I haven't done one on Roe. The last one I did was with Biden voters who voted for Youngkin in Virginia. And I'm actually taking just a slight 3-week hiatus before I start recording the second season of the focus group in the primary states next year. This is one thing though that I'll tell you, just from having done lots and lots of focus groups, that I've a lot of people called me when they're after the oral arguments. A lot of reporters called and they're like, what do you know? How do you think people will react? Will women in the suburbs, just totally freak out about this? And I'm a little bit, and I don't know what you guys are hearing, but I've just done hundreds and hundreds of these focus groups, and like, abortion doesn't come up. It's not a driving factor for people. We did our entire secret podcast on this on Friday, or not our entire one, because we also talked about musicals. But I'm a little bit, look, I think if there's a big decision that is a like a 5-4 decision that overturns Roe, there will be political fallout of some kind. Like, there will be a reaction, and I think it could motivate the Democratic base. But like, will it crater Republicans in the suburbs? I'm not sure that the level of intensity is there on this issue the way it used to be. And I think part of that comes from the fact that the world has changed a lot, right? There's you have universal access, just a lot more access to birth control. You have morning after pills. There's all kinds of reasons why I think it's just the level of urgency is different in voters, but there's also a bunch of other problems that people have. And so I'm not I think it takes away a big issue for Republicans. I do think it swaps, like, then Democrats are on offense and Republicans are now on defense and have to own it. And they've been allowed to take really extreme positions on abortion, knowing that the courts would defend them, that no one would ever fall through for it. So in some ways, I do think they could be like the dog that catches the car. But I am like somewhat skeptical. I'm not sure about this. I could be totally wrong. Just based on how seldom, the only time I hear abortion come up is from Republicans who use it as an excuse for why they voted for Donald Trump. I never hear it as a reason for Democrats as to why they're motivated about something.
Yeah, that's like insane to me. I mean, I literally vote like on abortion. Like, I mean, like I vote, like, I will not vote for people who will put people in positions to like vote an abortion. It's because I see it as like an economic, I know I'm in the minority on this. I know that like I'm much more principled and like, but this is, but I also agree with you, and having studied, frankly, Sarah, studied, like, really, like, interviewed, like, Phyllis Schlafly and like Karen DeCrow and like other women that like staged the Stop ERA kind of movement that came out of the kind of the Christian conservative right that was mobilized after Roe and because of Roe. Like, I do think that kind of the animating principles and the moral principles around Roe and the direness of it is much more suited to mobilize people who believe themselves to be like pro-life or anti-choice or however you want to kind of put it. Like, I think that it aligns for psychological reasons in that way. But I mean, I will say that, like, I unfortunately agree with you. Like, I don't see many people outside my sphere ever talking about abortion. It is a fringe issue. Like, especially when I go home to Rochester and talk to people that I know are Republican. And this is also this. I mean, this is less so. I would say it comes up even less than it did when I was in high school and I talked to those people. Like that, it really is like less of an issue than it ever was. And maybe you're right because of the technological issues and like the fact that people like have like more pervasive like access to birth control, that there is more access to knowledge around female reproductive health, or that there's more kind of maybe there's just more globalism and so more availability to like travel and get an abortion or something like that if you have to. But that being said, I still like, man, it's
So
yeah.
I want to sound a cautious dissenting note on this and suggest that there is reason to believe that the Democratic groundswell, if you actually overturned Roe, is going to be greater than would show up in Sarah's focus groups before you do. And
Yeah, maybe.
let me give you one reason to believe that. People are always more energized by the perception of losing than they are by the perception of winning. The pro-life side has had a 50-year streak of perceiving that it has lost. And the energy on the pro-life side, to a large degree, it's animated by two things. One is the sense that, I'm speaking from their point of view, we lost. We need to start winning. We need to roll back the gains that the other side made, which were at our expense. The second is the fact, and this is the fact that something that it won't change if Roe is overturned, is that I do think if you really believe that a fetus is a human life, there's an urgency to that is probably greater than the urgency associated with believing that your rights are being threatened. That said, I don't think we know how much energy there is in the pro-choice movement as a voting matter until they are on the losing side. When you have 15, 20 million suburban women who feel like their rights not may be taken away, have been taken away, that the Supreme Court, 5 men and Amy Coney Barrett have taken away their what they understand to be their fundamental rights. I think that may be a more galvanizing thing than would show up in a focus group for Sarah 6 months before it happens, when, let's be honest, the pro-choice movement has been saying it's going to happen for 50 years, and people are really used to the in this case, women who cried wolf effect with respect to abortion rights. And so I think we won't know how important it is until the day they do it. And I'm not saying you and Sarah are wrong about it. I'm just saying it's an open question in my mind.
I think it's a great point. And I would say that, like, Sarah, would you also say that, like, your understanding of I don't think anyone saw before Blackmun's decision, specifically how Blackmun created that decision and like specifically the wording in Roe, like until like that was created, like I don't think there was cohesion or understanding. I mean, like he created a trimester framework that literally had not been like, that wasn't even medically true. Like, and like, that was not something that was like, doctors told people. Trimesters came from like Roe v. Wade. Like that is like literally something that he created. And I think that I don't know. I think that like Ben has a really great point here.
So I think Ben has a great point too. And I totally, so I agree that we don't know. My point is that there's a lot of people saying they're sure people will be in the streets over this and that it will be a massive electoral boom. And I'm not sure of that. I would not take that position necessarily.
But
let's just say
Roe wasn't an electoral. Are you going to say that, Ben? Sorry.
I was going to say, like, the key point is the one that Sarah's making, which is we actually don't know. It could be that a huge number of pro-choice women are pro-choice, and that's one issue among many. It could be that the moment their actual abortion rights are at risk, it's a single issue for them, the way it's been a single issue for many pro-life voters since 1973, or since the religious right really galvanized on it. And I just think that's a hypothesis that we've got to remain agnostic about, and we shouldn't either wish cast or doom cast on. We're gonna find out. I mean, it's happening.
Yeah.
We got to leave it there
gotta go.
because Sarah and I have an embassy to go to.
I gotta put on
I'm gonna
heels
put
for
on
the
a
first
tie.
time in 2 years.
Will you guys send
And-
me a selfie? I can't with Lucy.
We'll send you
Oh
a
my
selfie
God.
with Lucienne. All right. We're going to be back tomorrow. Got no idea who the guest is going to be, but it'll be
I'm
somebody
hoping it's
fun.
going to be Dwayne Betts. But
It
we'll
may
see.
be Dwayne Betts. It may be somebody else. But it will be 22 hours and 58 minutes from now. And until then, Kate?
Je ne sais pas. C'est le soir de French podcast. Oui? Oui?
We. Bye.
Oui?
Bye.